through high school, college, or like in your grown-up years? Was that, that
Well, I
was a weird
I'm
story?
I mean, all
Of
sorts
course.
of weird stories, but
Hmm.
what we're willing to divulge on air.
Right.
But as far as like paranormal and such, um, I'm known to on our show, especially for being kind of ghost blind. So
Oh,
I've
okay.
not had any kind of like spiritual paranormal kind of
Ghost
experiences.
blinds. Okay.
So
That's
I mean,
interesting.
I even moved into an apartment that was haunted,
Oh my
and
God.
there is a part of a house, and this was when I was in college. It was part of a house that was that the whole place was haunted, and I
Oh,
moved into this back section of this house because it's split into like three apartments, and the reason that the girl, and I knew her, but I didn't know she lived there before me. But the reason she moved out is because she was getting so freaked out by all this weird paranormal kind of activity that
right.
was going on. And uh the neighbor up front, she knew about it, and then and all this stuff, but I didn't know about it. I didn't have any kind of experiences, anything. So I've never had any kind of thing like that, but I have uh on occasion more than once seen some things that in the sky that definitely fall under the UFO category.
Sure.
uh and growing up in the country, what a shooting star looks like,
Yeah.
what a satellite looks like, what planes look like, and how these things behave normally in the sky.
Right.
And then you see things that are there and they're moving in ways that they shouldn't be, or we don't have the ways, our
Right.
technology doesn't have the way to move like this. But I've seen some stuff like that, UFO kind of things, that I go ahead and I throw it out. I had a weird case of missing time when I was driving down Route 66,
I love it.
and uh I was listening to a mixtape, and
Mixtape. I love
yeah,
that too.
yeah, that tells you how far back this is. Yeah.
That takes us.
So it
You
We
was
just
can
aged us.
we can
right, right.
relate.
So it was a pretty long song. It was like a 6-7 minute song. And I'm just driving along, and it's like I was driving back to college, and I was sober on the road, and I was just cruising along this route path down Route 66 because it wasn't
Mhm.
as busy as the highway. And I'd done this, tons of times before. And I'm just cruising along, and I hear the first few notes of this song. And then all of a sudden, I'm really confused and just
Huh.
kind of like, what, where am I? I mean, I'm driving, but I'm kind of, okay. And then, this, it's kind of silence. And then the last few notes of the song comes on. I'm like, well, that was weird.
Yeah.
So I rewound the tape to see if maybe I taped it wrong, the searching for the logic, searching for the
Yes.
solution. So the first thing is, well, maybe I did this, so I rewound it, and the whole thing was there. And
Huh.
it's like, huh, well, and I know that it wasn't like when you get road hypnotized, because whenever that would happen to me, it's because I'd be too focused on the music, on the song.
Right.
So like this was just a moment where I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
know. So
Right.
I don't know what happened. I mean, logic says that I just kind of that I kind of drifted off, but I don't
Zoned
know,
out or
because
something.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
I've had those
Interesting.
missing time moments, but I think it was probably due to a lot of alcohol.
right, yeah, no, I've had plenty of those too. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that came later.
Well, and
Um,
it's funny because when you have these experiences, though, as little or as big as they are, sometimes they're profound, sometimes they're like really minor.
mhm.
You can always find a way to talk yourself out of it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And then later you look back and you reflect on it, and you're like, wait a second, that was strange. Like that was not normal. You know what I'm saying? I gosh, it's funny because I mean, well, no, seriously, mixtapes. We just need to touch on this for a second because, like, I used to love making mixtapes and like
mhm.
rewinding them and like listening to them. And there was one night when I was growing up and I was a teenager. There was
You were
no
the
drug.
queen of mixtapes, I have
I
to
well,
add.
I think I was the princess because the queen was our other friend. She was really good at mixtapes.
Mhm.
But you know, every night we listen to, hey Barry, welcome, Hank.
Hey, Barry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
Yep.
you. I was gonna share
Great.
a story about how like I used to listen to U2 on repeat, right? Or
Mhm.
yeah, and so I would listen to that, and then I'd go to sleep listening to music on my boombox, on my mixtape,
Yeah.
right? And there was one night where I went to bed and I felt like I was awake, but I wasn't awake. And then I felt like
Mhm.
there was a presence.
Mhm.
And I was like, but I was asleep, but like I couldn't wake up. And then I felt my whole body be lifted and like I was almost pressed up to like the ceiling, right? I
Mhm.
couldn't move, couldn't wake up, but I thought I was awake. And I felt like a presence was trying to extract me or like take me or something. I don't know, because it was, you know, I was a teenager. And
Wow.
then all of a sudden I just in my head said no, like really firmly.
Mhm.
And I literally dropped on my bed, fell off my bed, and went and reached because my bed was close to the door, reached the door. And when I went to open up the door, I was almost like a vacuum. Like I had to like pull it open. And then it was like, whoomp, and it opened and I tumbled out. And like the
Whoa.
lights were on,
Wow.
everything was like normal. And I was so scared that I started crying because, you know, I was a teenager and I went running down the stairs. Of course, I told my dad and I told my stepmom, and they're like, what are you on? Let me
Right.
see your eyeballs. You know, like, I'm like, I swear to God, I'm not on anything, you know, and I wasn't into any of that, you know, really. And not at that time, that was later. But, you know, and still to this day, you know, I think to myself, what did I have? Sleep paralysis. I talked myself right out of it. Did I have sleep paralysis was I being abducted? You know, like what was happening? I don't know. But it was
Yeah.
weird.
Wow.
It doesn't sound like typical sleep paralysis, because sleep paralysis is usually where somebody feels like a presence, and then they usually feel like a sensation or a weight on like their chest.
Okay.
So, and now it could still be, I'm not an expert, or we've never claimed to be
Yeah.
experts, but from all I've heard about sleep paralysis, it does sound a little different, because you know you're not able to move, you're kind of half awake, you kind of feel a presence. Sometimes people will see shadows, sometimes people may see, you know, something like you know, aliens or something.
Hmm.
And then, you know, but the body won't move and you have the heaviness on the chest.
Right.
That's why um there's all these old famous paintings. They're all based off of one painting, but it's it's like the Nightmare or something like that, where there's a woman on her bed and then there's a little goblin guy that's sitting on her chest. And
That's
that's
creepy.
that's based on like, but what that scientifically we've learned is like that whole thing, that's sleep paralysis. But the
Wow.
lifting and the hovering, I don't know.
I think
Yeah.
that's Bono's voice. I think it's the power of you too.
Yes, totally. I was having a
Fu-
full-on Bono experience.
Funny enough, last night I watched the what do they do? It's the Kennedy Honors. You know what I mean?
I
Whatever
think
that thing is, where they take an artist and they honor them by having a bunch of other artists come on and play their songs. Eddie Vedder did, which, you know, I was a Pearl Jam fan way back when, but, you know, kind of whatever over the years. But man, he did a couple of U2 songs that were just so good.
that's cool.
And he did them with a small choir behind him. Was wonderful. So crazy
Yeah.
that U2 came into the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eddie Vedder's pretty cool too. Pearl Jam's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, hey, one of the OGs, you know?
Yeah.
Yes.
That was the
Absolutely.
first concert that I went to. Barry, you were there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah.
Yep.
Oh my God, I'm thinking my first concert I went to, and you guys are gonna laugh, is I went to the Beach Boys. Like
Hey,
when my
man.
That's
friend's
awesome
dad
though.
That's
took us to
great.
like Pine Knob or something, because we're from Michigan. So
Yeah.
Good.
originally, but yeah. So
Mine was
anyways.
Kiss.
Oh well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Mine's not as cool. Oak Ridge Boys.
Oh.
Hey,
Wow.
dude. Elvira, man, that's a classic song.
Oh
You
yeah.
never get.
Yeah. Yep. Great,
Well,
man.
Barry, we're glad that you're here and jumping in the conversation. So I was
Yeah.
asking Adam, you know, like, did you have any like weird experiences or epiphanies that brought you to creating this podcast? You know, there's always a rhyme to a reason to everything. You know, I mean, obviously we're
Yeah.
chaos, so you know, we've definitely came to the table with chaos, you know, so.
Yeah. Well, my life has been just weird.
Okay.
Anyway, um, but I've got to say, you know, when we got together and we were talking about how, you know, how are we going to approach this? What is the thing we're going to talk about? The weird thing just sort of happened.
Yeah.
Adam had the original idea of it, but as we got into it, like I quickly realized that, like, you know, we're best friends. We grew up together, and there were things that I never told him because,
Really?
yeah, it was just they were too weird. But
Were
Like,
you afraid of what his reaction would be? Or?
I don't even know, man. I think that maybe, but not really, because he never judged. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think more or less it was just kind of like, I don't know, like it was so weird. I don't know that I believed it. Do you
right?
know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
yeah. And one of the things, one of the stories, one of the first stories I told him where he was like, what the hell, man? Um, I had my dad and I one night were coming home. I was probably around 10. I put myself around 10 to maybe 12 years old. And I lived kind of out in the boonies in Oklahoma. So here, for folks that don't know, it's fairly desolate where we live, not a lot of light pollution. So I live 3 miles out of town, and so it's pretty dark. And coming home one night, we're kind of on the main road to our house, and we kind of crest over this little hill, and we see this object that's 50 to 100 feet in the air, like really close to the ground, with lights on it, and it's just sitting there. It's hovering. And my dad is driving, and my dad is like super straight laced, like, you
Yeah.
know, super religious, like, you know, this is 1986, maybe 5, 6, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Um, so no cell phones.
No.
We start coming up on the thing, and my dad starts to slow down, and he's like, what is that? And we get to where we're crawling now, and we're maybe going 5 mile an hour on a main highway, you know, 65-mile-an-hour highway, and no other cars. And we get pretty much under it, and we roll the windows down, and it's silent, and it's just sitting there above us, and we are just like, we didn't even say anything to each other. We were just like dumbfounded. What is this thing, man? And we sat there
Right.
for maybe a couple of minutes. And my dad has the idea, okay, let's get home, because we're maybe a half a mile from my house at that point. Let's get home, and then I'm going to call the sheriff's department, because back then the only way that you could know if there's aircraft in the area is the sheriff department had radar system that they could kind of see, you know. And so we get home. The whole way we're going home, I'm watching the thing, and it starts to leave where it was, and it's kind of shadowing us, sort of like as we're going home. It starts to crawl over. There's a creek a little bit of ways from our house that is lined with trees, and it's kind of following the tree line. We get home. I stand on the front porch. My dad goes inside to call the sheriff's department. They don't see anything, haven't had any reports of anything. And after that, like, I don't remember anything other than thinking, wow, that's weird. I don't know what that was, you know, and
Yeah.
it faded away into the back of my mind. And my dad and I actually, we never talked about it until I told the story on the podcast about 4 or 5 years ago. And I thought, I'm going to go back and ask my dad if he remembers that. And so I went back and I asked him, I said, hey, do you remember this night? And he was like, absolutely crystal clear.
Wow.
Same memory of it. So it wasn't like, you know, as a kid, sometimes you're like, was that real? Would that really happen? You
Yes.
know, and as time goes on as adults, you kind of like let that stuff kind of fade away. But I told that story, and Adam was just like, wow, man, I can't believe you never told me that.
That's
And
crazy.
yeah, so I've always been fascinated by UFOs. I've always been fascinated by aliens. I'm fascinated
Yeah.
by this weird world that we live in, this universe, this thing that seems to have this, you know, these laws but at a certain point we can't understand quite what it all means. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we do. That's what we talk about on a weekly basis, you know.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. How do you guys, Ian, do you have a question? I thought you were gonna jump in there.
Well, just to touch upon that, I was wondering what your thoughts are. In the past, what year or two, the government has released some
Yeah.
pictures and evidence
Yeah.
of alien stuff, and I feel like it wasn't like the big story I was hoping for. Like, people weren't talking about it enough. Like, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on the stuff that they did release?
You and I are the same person, my man,
That's
because
a good question.
we ask this question to anyone that's interested in UFOs. This is one of the main things that we ask. And I'm with you, man. It's like, I don't know that any answer would be satisfactory. Um, why do they want us to know now when
Right.
they've, you know, they've put it under the rug for so long and now they want to bring it out? And I thought it was interesting that it came out around the time when we were all isolated, and the main focus at that time was a pandemic that we, you know, obviously were reeling from.
Yeah.
Right.
Here's what I think. I think it's real. I think they're real. I think that what they are, I don't know. I think that for me personally, I don't know how Adam feels about this, but for me personally, the topic of aliens and the topic of UFOs have to be separated right now. You know, because I don't know, we can't draw the conclusion that these things are like, you know, sent by, you know, other life forms. I mean, of course, I would love for that to be the case, but these things could be drones, you know,
Yeah.
they could be from the future. They could, you know, all these things about time travel and we have these discussions oftentimes, Adam and I will, about time, what time is, you know, the idea of time being sort of layered upon itself.
Right.
That kind of stuff, man, is like, who knows what these things are? Who knows if they come from a future time with future human beings that are trying to
Save
keep
us.
tabs or figure it out? I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah,
That's interesting. That's an interesting perspective. Go ahead, Adam. I'm sorry.
I tend to lean towards, well, Barry and I, we agree on the oddity of their explanations. Well, you know, they're not saying that they're aliens, but they're just saying that they're not ours. They're not something that's, you know, technology that we, as you know, our military or our country possesses. That's the main thing of it. That's their way of saying, you know, we don't know what it is, but it's not us, and it's not like anything else here on Earth that we know of. So obviously that opens up the door to being, it could be any of these other things, could be interplanetary, interdimensional, different, you know, time travel, these kind of things. I tend to lean towards you know, more like the, you know, space apps, you know, that there's these things that could come from space, and yeah, maybe they are drones or something like that. But if they are not of Earth, then I tend to think that, you know, they're alien, by, you know, from another galaxy or planet, or
Yeah.
and possibly dimension. But you
Yeah.
know, because we know that there are a parallel universe, something like that, you know, because
Right,
we're
right.
learning more and more about all these crazy science fiction things that we used to, you know, love and watch in movies and television and comic books, and how much of that is actually turning out to be real, you know, or at least theoretically accurate real, you know, or but then of course that brings us to what is real. But
Right. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you're,
Yeah.
you know, you're just bringing me back to the Future. I mean, think about
Right.
that. Like, he wrote
Yeah.
that book, right? And it was based on what he thought was his imagination, but it was actually like a real experience because it was his son that came back in time, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, like I
Yeah.
just had an epiphany right there. So
It is one of those things that it's like, it's such a weird concept, like the universe itself, and it's so vast that we don't really, there's no way for us to understand what is the truth, you know, because for whatever reason, the modern humans have made it to this point to where we know enough to know that we don't know.
yeah.
yes,
and it's like I've been really fascinated by the things that are coming up. I think that hopefully, like, the word is that there's going to be more of this stuff that's supposed to come out this year. And I hope that they lift the veil a little bit more. But the Bob Lazar interviews, I don't know, have you checked his stuff out at all?
No, no.
Okay. He's one of the guys, like one of the original people that claimed to work at Area 51.
Okay.
And his story is really interesting because, like, back in the day, they tried to throw him under the bus and say that he was a liar and all this kind of stuff. Well, he was one of the ones that said he's the first guy that came up with this idea of the molecule. What is that, Adam? Do you remember the molecule name?
I can't remember it. It was either as an element, I think. Is it either an
element.
element or a molecule that didn't exist on Earth?
Element.
We could Google it later.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, you're good. I was just saying.
Yeah. So this element, this thing, he said that basically he was in charge of, they hired him to try to reverse engineer UFO propulsion systems.
Oh, that's cool.
And he said that, like, this thing was an engine of some sort. It was some sort of energy device. And when it would turn on, you couldn't get anywhere near it because it was like a reverse magnet. So it would, like, force things away from it, but he was just dumbfounded by it. He could not figure it out. And finally he came up with this hypothesis, this idea that now recently we just came across this element like 10 years ago. And he was talking about it in 1988 or something.
Right.
So you see stuff like that and you're like, that has to be real.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he's lying. But definitely check out his stuff if you haven't. Bob Lazar, there's a couple of, Joe Rogan did a couple of an interview with him, and then they did a real in-depth documentary about him too. It's really, really good.
Okay. I'm sure my brother knows about it. Do you guys, so with some of the people that my brother loves all that kind of stuff. He's like a big walker. Was it, the Walker
Skinwalker.
Ranch? Yeah.
Yep.
Skinwalker Ranch. Do you guys come across that when on your podcast? You guys have people that come and share stories? Yeah. I've gotten through some,
Yeah.
you guys have a lot of episodes.
Yes.
Yeah.
and they're all over the place. They're not in
Yeah.
chronological order. Right. So, which I'm sure you probably did that on purpose, but, I mean, is there any stories that just sort of pop out at you where you're kind of like, holy, okay, yeah,
There's been
wild.
a lot.
Yeah.
There has
been
been a lot.
Is there one that just sort of sticks different, lands a little differently,
There's been a lot of those too.
Okay.
or one that truly terrifies you. Like,
Yeah,
I'll
you just can't let it go. You're just
I'll tell you a more recent one.
It's probably my spider story.
It's a weird story in the fact that, like, we've never had anything like it on the podcast, but we had a young lady on. Oh, this is probably a couple of months ago, and her ex-husband was arrested for sex trafficking.
Wow.
And come to find out, like, the feds had a whole case against him. They had a sting operation. They busted him. She ends up, like, buying his lie, hook, line, and sinker. She has a couple of kids with him, so she's, like, really reluctant to let the relationship go.
Right.
He drags her further and further and further into this craziness. He ends up getting off. I mean, with a slap on the wrist. They stay together for a couple of years longer, and she tells the story, and she's written a book about it, and it's absolutely one of the craziest things. I'm also a true crime kind of a nut, and I enjoy that kind of stuff. So it kind of hits that it tickles that bone.
Yeah.
That to me was like, it was such a riveting episode, and her telling the story was just amazing. It was absolutely amazing.
We'll have to check out that episode.
Wow.
That's pretty cool.
That was oh gosh, that was right at towards the end of the year. So and that was a fantastic story. And again, that's one of the ones that we like I said, we let weird cover a lot of ground.
Yeah, you
So
do.
we like good
That's
stories. We
cool.
like hearing these true life experiences
Yeah.
that people have. And, so we've had people who've come on, woman Barry was talking about, and then with their kind of true crime kind of stuff. We had one of my friends who was one of my roommates in college. He's come on and he shared all these crazy adventures that he finds himself in traveling, where he ended up like God, I'm trying to think of all the different stories my buddy Sam has told. But he ended up at some kind of youth hostel in Japan and taking some acid and
Oh, no.
and trying to get his work passport stamped so
Yeah.
they could teach again the next year in Korea. And stuff.
Wow.
Wow.
And that's like the briefest version of that. That whole thing was an epic story. I think he was wasted when he was flying too. Sam's just a character. Him and just everything about Sam is he's a fascinating guy. He's a funny guy.
Yeah.
Sounds
We got a
like he's
couple
enjoying
episodes
life.
out of him.
Yeah. Sam's been on like 4 or 5 times, I think. And we've had professional traveling clowns and freak show performers on.
Love it.
We had a body piercer come on and tell us all about how that kind of, because we like interesting weird jobs too, because those
Yeah.
people have those stories. We've had a guest who was a burlesque performer who also was a suspension, like where they put the hooks in the back and
Oof.
pull her up they pull you up in the air. She
Okay.
and another girl did that during a show, a Jane's Addiction show a few
my
years
gosh.
back. And she's also like a web dominatrix, and all sorts of crazy stuff
Yeah.
like that. And we had one guy come on who he was from Canada, and his mother was at that point, or at least at one point, was like the most, like, I don't know how to say it, most possessed, but she had a lot of like these demons
Yeah.
in her, that
was crazy.
was a crazy story.
Yeah, that was a
Because he
crazy
had to
story.
grow up with her and like deal with
possessed
her.
mom. Yeah.
And she was like just
Yeah.
those are some harrowing stories.
I tell you
that
what,
he
though,
had.
one that sticks with me is your mom's friend Kip, Adam.
Mm-hmm.